Okay, so welcome. I know most of you. If I don't know you, my name is Samantha Stryker. I'm the Community and Adult Services Librarian here at Richmond. And I, along with the Book Sandwiched In Committee, have been putting together the lunchtime book chats. So we're glad that you are here. I don't really have many library updates for those of you who were on last week, but if you weren't on last week, this is my public service announcement that the library is open. You can come in. So we encourage you to do that if you want to pick up books, or you can just place holds and pick them up, or all of those good things. Our interlibrary loan is back, which is still the big excitement here at the library. So we will just go ahead and jump right in today. Our first speaker is Lynn Vanderbeck. And Lynn, I'm just going to ask you to also tell everybody a little bit about yourself before you begin. Okay, you should be unmuted.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I never planned to tell you about myself. Okay, yeah, I'm Lynn Vanderbeck. I am in a book club with Sam and Lori, who are both on the call, and enjoy reading a great deal. I have just recently retired from Caldwell Manufacturing. I've been in human resources for many, many years, and am enjoying having time to read and just smell the roses. I live in Byron, and yeah. So let me just get started. Okay. So I'm reviewing the Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. I don't know if anybody has read it, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. Sue Monk Kidd was raised in a small southern town where she attended a Baptist church, and she also has a degree from Texas Christian University. She studied creative writing after that, and did study feminist theology some. So I think that was kind of an interesting tie-in. She has also written a couple of other bestsellers. One of them is The Invention of Wings, and the other is The Secret Life of Bees, both excellent books. She's also done 2 memoirs, one with her daughter and one on her own, which is called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, which is about her own journey to claim her passion and find her voice. So this is a work of historical fiction, obviously, fiction, because it's about the wife of Jesus. The Bible is actually silent on whether Jesus was married, but it would have been unusual for a man in his 20s in those days not to be married. And so it's not a stretch to think that, this is kind of a reimagining that could have happened. And little is known of Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30 when John the Baptizer started his ministry. I thought it was interesting that Sue Monk Kidd said that she spent 14 months researching that era, the early first century, before she wrote a single word about this book. She, she knew that this was really a massive undertaking, and she said she wanted to get it right. So she did lots of study about the historical Jesus, about the era, the culture, all kinds of things, which I thought was really interesting, and it certainly came through in the writing. She wanted to reimagine this time in history and what life would be like and how things would be different if Jesus had been married, if there had been a woman in his life. So she makes the point that she was writing this book not as a religious person, but as a novelist. So people who may criticize, she says, this is fiction. I'm not saying it's anything else. And really the book is Anna's story. It's about Anna, who is the wife. She's the daughter of a chief scribe of Herod. So she was raised in a wealthy family. She's very bright and passionate, and in those days, women generally did not learn how to read and write, but she begged her father, who allowed her to learn to read and write. And she really longs to write stories about women, especially those who are silenced or marginalized. Early in the story, her father's sister, Yaltha, comes to live with them. And she is Anna's ally and is a big character in this story. When Anna's 14, she's promised in marriage to a man who she is much older, whom she abhors. And they never lived together. He actually dies before they live together, but then she's considered a widow, so she wasn't suitable to be married to anyone at that point. And so, you know, her options, at least in the wealthier strata of life, so her options were much smaller at that point. She eventually marries Jesus, and there's a whole story about how she meets him and how they get to know each other. But she lives with him from the time that in his early 20s until he begins his ministry. And I can't tell you about how that happens, but it was very interesting to learn about their life in the family's compound, living with his brothers and their wives, and of course Mary and a sister who came back after she was widowed. So this Aunt Yaltha had come to live with the family from Alexandria, where she had to leave for reasons that I won't get into. And she was very, very impactful with Anna and helping her learn and grow and find her passion. So I want to read to you a little bit about this. This is early in the book where Yaltha has come on to the scene. And of course, she's told Anna about women learning how to read in Alexandria, and that so just opened a whole new world to her. And the mother, Anna's mother, didn't want her to read, didn't want her to be educated. So there was a lot of discord between them. So this is a scene where Yaltha and Anna go up to the rooftop in the evening. So I'll just read this part. Voices floated from nearby rooftops, the wail of a child, a goat bleating. Finally, Yaltha reached behind her back for a bundle and unwrapped the linen cloth. She peeled away the layers slowly, her eyes alight, casting quick glances at me. She lifted up the contents, a limestone bowl glowing. Okay, my computer does that every so often. She lifted up the contents of a limestone bowl, glowing and round, a perfect full moon. I brought it with me from Alexandria. I wish you to have it. When she placed it in my hands, a quiver entered my body. I ran my palms over the surface, the wide mouth, the milky whorls in the stone. Do you know what an incantation bowl is? I shook my head. I only knew it must be something of great magnitude, something too perilous or wondrous to unveil anywhere except on the roof in the dark. In Alexandria, we women pray with them. We write our most secret prayer inside them like this. She pointed a finger inside the bowl and moving it in a spiral line around the sides. Every day, we sing the prayer. As we do, we turn the bowl in slow circles, and the words wriggle to life and spin off towards heaven. She said, at the bottom of the bowl, we draw an image of ourselves to make certain God knows to whom the petition belongs. My mouth parted. Surely she knew no devout Jew would look upon figures in human and animal form, much less create them. You must write your prayer in the bowl, my aunt told me, but take care what you ask, for you shall surely receive it. When I looked up, Yaltha's eyes were settled on me. She said, a man's holy of holies contains God's law, but inside a woman there is only longings. And she tapped the flat bone over my heart and spoke the charge that caused something to flame up in my chest. Write what's inside here, inside your holy of holies. And this is what she wrote. Inside of her bowl days later, she wrote, Lord our God, hear my prayer, the prayer of my heart. Bless the largeness in me, no matter how I fear it. Bless my reed, pens, and my inks. Bless the words I write. May they be beautiful in your sight. May they be visible to eyes not yet born. When I am dust, sing these words over my bones. She was a voice. And that was kind of the theme through the whole book. She took that incantation bowl with her everywhere she went, and she wrote. She was a voice. She wanted to be heard. So there were a couple of other characters to tell you about. Judas, which I think we all know who Judas was. In this reimagining, he was Anna's half-brother or adoptive brother. And he was seen as a kind and loving brother to her, but he was also a firebrand zealot who was deeply opposed to the Roman occupation of the region. And Sue Monk Kidd said she wanted him to be reimagined as more complex than we know him to be. And so gave kind of a reason why he might have done what he did when he turned Jesus over to the Jews. So that was kind of an interesting character. And then Mary, the mother of Jesus, of course, is shown as a very human person, aging, gray hair, she's working, she's doing chores and supporting her family, and was very supportive of Anna. And then the main one being, of course, Jesus, how he's depicted in this story. As someone who is a very human man. In this version, he has a wife and a family. Just interesting to imagine what that relationship might have been like. He's a laborer. He goes off to work every day, walking sometimes days to get to a place where he's going to work to keep his very poor family able to survive. And he had revolutionary ideas like the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. He's shown in this story as a man with an intimate relationship with God that he's slowly coming to understand. And I think that we know so much about the divinity of Christ, and in Christian doctrine, we know that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. And it was just so interesting to me to see this reimagined Jesus as a fully human person. I found that it just gave me a new perspective. But the main character is Anna. This story is about her, and it's an inspiring one. She wasn't a weak, subservient wife. She was a partner, and she was a fierce and compassionate friend. I thought it was a really inspiring book, and as a Christian, it was really just informed me a lot about what life was like for some people in that time, and what it might have been like for Jesus. So that's my story.
Thank you, Lynn. Does anybody have any questions for Lynn about the book? If you do, you can unmute or you can put them in the chat.
Hi, I have a question. Can Lynn tell us about her educational background?
Of who? Of me? Happens to be my sister. So I have a master's in divinity, so this was kind of an interesting take for me. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you for that excellent question. All right. Thank you to Lynn. So I'm going to go ahead and mute Lynn. Our next speaker is going to be Mary Hutchinson, and I'll let Mary tell you about herself and what she is reviewing.
Okay. I live in Byron, and I'm a retired RN, also a retired captain from the Army Reserves, having spent 22 years in a evacuation hospital unit in Rochester. I'm a wife, a mother, a grandma, and a great-grandma. So I'm busy all the time. I do a lot of reading. Actually, I do a lot more listening than I do reading, because I download my books so that I can listen to them while I sew. And my favorite stories are historical fiction and mystery novels. And this, I have read John Grisham novels in the past, so this one was quite of great interest to me. Now, I don't have the book, but I do, well, this is not going to work too well. I have a picture of the book, but that's not going to show up. So that's me. I have a bachelor's degree from Damon College in nursing. About the author. I believe that John Grisham is probably a very familiar name to you. He's been around for quite a while. And he was born in 1955 in Jonesboro, Arkansas. When he was growing up, he thought he would like to play professional baseball, but he soon decided he didn't have the talent to pursue it. And so he went to law school and practiced law he went to an accounting, took an degree in accounting, and then he went to law school and practiced law for 10 years, specializing in criminal defense and personal injury litigation. From 1983 to 1990, he served in the State House of Representatives. And in his spare time, he continued to try to write whatever spare time he had. And finally, his first book was A Time to Kill, and it was published in 1989. Since then, he has written 30-some books. I believe this one is the 33rd, maybe, book that he has published. And several of his books, like The Firm, and I believe A Time to Kill also was made into movies. The book that I'm going to review is called The Guardians, and it is still on the bestseller list. It was published in 2019. It's based loosely on a true case, like a lot of his books, and combines some of the stories from other cases that he has seen. He has written what I believe is a disturbing story that illustrates the injustices in the U.S. legal system and how justice can rely on the location of the investigation, the trial, the appeal, and the sentencing. And it causes you to do some thinking as you read the book. The beginning of it is, and I'll read you this from a part of the description of the story. In a small town in Florida called Seabrook, a young lawyer named Keith Russo was shot dead at his desk as he worked late one night. The killer left no clues. There were no witnesses, no one with a motive. But the police soon came to suspect Quincy Miller, a young Black man who was once a client of Russo's. Quincy was tried, convicted, and sent to prison for life. For 22 years, he remained in prison, maintaining his innocence, but nobody was listening. He had no lawyer, no advocate on the outside, and even his family had deserted him. His wife, incidentally, had testified against him at his trial. So he's gotten desperate now. And he writes a letter to Guardian Ministries, which is a small nonprofit run by Cullen Post, who is a lawyer and also an Episcopal minister. There's a side story, and it tells it in the book, about how Cullen was working as a lawyer and how he became an Episcopal priest. So, and that's very interesting also. Guardian Ministries accepts only a few innocent cases at a time. This Cullen Post travels the country fighting wrongful convictions and taking on clients forgotten by the system. With Quincy Miller, though, he gets far more than he bargained for. Powerful, ruthless people murdered Keith Russo and they don't want Quincy Miller exonerated. They killed one lawyer 22 years ago, and they are willing to kill again to keep Quincy in jail. There are many seemingly insurmountable problems, surprises, and side issues along the way, including the town sheriff, who has a vested interest in keeping the guilty verdict at all cost. This Cullen Post is often helped in his investigations by an unpaid associate who does undercover investigations for him. The associate is a man who Post succeeded in getting exonerated from the crime which put him in prison, and he has since chosen to use his settlement from the state money in helping others by donating his time and talent to Guardian Ministries. And it's very interesting, some of the things that he does, because he's not constrained by a license or anything else. So he does these things undercover. And you'll kind of shake your head when you find out some of the ways that he finds out information for Mr. Post. I'm not going to give away anything that would destroy the story. I think the story was fascinating. I enjoyed the book thoroughly. It's quite long. Can't remember how many pages right now. And also because it involves some associations with drug gangs and international what do I want to say, crimes committed outside the United States. Some of the narrative is gruesome. So I want to warn you in advance. Some of it you may want to kind of like zip by fast, because it talks about some things that I thoroughly believe probably did happen. And you may not want to hear about it. I understand our library has copies, hardcover copies of this book in large print and regular print. And I recommend the book if you're looking for something a little different, I think.
All
And
right.
there you are.
Thank you very much, Mary. Does anyone have any questions for Mary about this book? Yes, Francis, I'm going to unmute you.
I
don't
can't
think-
hear you.
You're not unmuted yet.
Oh,
There you go.
There you go.
I'm curious where you are. Your setting is beautiful, the trees. Where are you located?
My husband is a computer, as you see, it says James Hutchison up there. And that is our lawn, our yard. And he made that the background.
Oh,
And you can do that on Zoom. You can change your background and make it anything you want. They have pictures up there that you can use, or you can use your own. So he
you're not
spoils
really
me.
here.
He spoils me rotten, and that's one of the things that he did to spoil me, was to put our yard up there so that it looks like I'm outdoors. I'm not really. I'm up in what I considered my cave, which is Mary's woman cave. That is my sewing room.
Perfect. I chose a cluttered bookshelf as my background, very carefully curated here in my office. So thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. Yes, and I wanted to mention too, both of these first two books are available in audio, regular print and large print at the library, as well as on Overdrive as an ebook. So you can find both the Book of Longings and the Guardians in those formats through the library. And Mary, did you say you listened to this book?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, I downloaded it from the internet And sometime I'll tell you how I do that. And then I'll, that's the easiest way for me to read. It's very hard for me to sit and read.
Mhm.
So I download them, I do them while I listen to them while I sew. So.
Wonderful. I definitely enjoy audiobooks as well for that reason. Sometimes I feel like I can concentrate better that way. All right, so thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and unmute or request to unmute our next speaker, which is David Beatty. Dave, can you unmute there? Maybe. There we go. So I will again let him introduce himself and take it away.
Thank you, Sam. My name is David Beatty. I'm an architect, sort of. I'm retired, sort of. I'm also Richard Beatty's brother, so that's probably more information than you need right there. Like Sam, I have a library behind me. This is my vast library collection here, which that kind of lends itself to how serious this is going to be, perhaps. But at any rate, we're going to talk about a book. There goes my library. So the book is, see if we can get a shot of this. Cry Me a River by T.R. Pearson. I read this book about 6 years ago. Actually, this is actually part of a trilogy that Mr. Pearson wrote. This is the first book in the trilogy. I actually read the third book in the trilogy. Each of the books are kind of stand on their own. But T.R. Pearson is, I guess you could say, is a regionalist or a regional writer. He grew up in Virginia. He spent a certain number of years in New York City, but he's been a writer since quite a while. This book we're going to talk about, Cry Me a River, was written in 1993. But he's a very interesting and unique writer. I would say that he's characterized by his narrative style and his craft. I have a brief review that someone wrote on Goodreads, and I read a lot of reviews on this as a background. Pretty much nobody understood the book except maybe this guy. So from a reviewer, Cry Me a River is not so much about plot as it is about characterization. Story after story gets told and overlaid on the plot to the extent that sometimes you forget that there is a plot. All the characters have their silly foibles, and the narrator, Ray Tatum, seems to be a good-hearted soul with a keen eye who's able to render whatever plot there is and whatever foibles there are in a hilarious deadpan manner. This is a very funny book. At the same time, it's not a comedy. There are existential questions lurking under the humor, and there are tragic characters fueling the plot. So with that said, Cry Me a River is, on the surface, is a murder mystery. It involves the murder of a deputy sheriff, and the setting is somewhere in western, semi-rural West Virginia, probably off Interstate 81 somewhere. The narrator is another deputy sheriff named Ray Tatum, who you don't really see his name throughout the entire book. One reason I know it's Ray Tatum is it's in a review, and Ray Tatum surfaces in the second and third books, but his name really isn't mentioned, but he is the narrator. So the book is a murder mystery. It involves a mysterious woman. It involves treachery, jealousy, more murder, and a sort of a tragic ending, which is not really the ending. So at any rate, what I would like to do is read a couple of introductory parts of the narration and just try to give everyone a feel for Mr. Pearson's style. And it's somewhat, I wouldn't call it dense, but he writes a lot about characters and character development, and he jumps all over the place in time. He'll go from one event and he'll go down a road and go into great detail about another character. So the book opens and it describes this mysterious woman, and you don't know anything about it at this point. I'm just going to read a little bit of that. She wasn't much of a regular beauty and hadn't been born into loveliness, though plainly she'd overcompensated. Could manufacture well enough what she needed of seduction, fabricate what she required of charm. She didn't have much call to be beautiful too. That would have drained the sport from it. So this is the first paragraph of the book. In the second paragraph, we started to hear from Mr. Tatum. So apparently he's witness to all these events in the book. So he says, I never knew anyone to tire of hearing the thing. There was evermore somebody clamoring about with a cousin come for a visit, or a buddy passing through town who'd seen already the furniture mill and had eaten at the fish house and tolerated the panoramas up along the ridge, had become, in fact, fairly saturated with the local enticement, but for our tale of woe. So they'd come to wonder of me, might I speak of it, please? Might I share with their relations and with their buddies news of our own tragic episode, which had gotten to be an object of civic pride, suggesting like it did that we were, after all, under the surface of things, a community of passionate people who sometimes slaughtered each other for love. So that sort of introduces, well, something happened and there's a mysterious woman involved. So the book immediately goes into, I guess, the present time. And we find Deputy Sheriff Ray Tatum with some character that's with him, the guy named Ellis, which we find out much about later. And they're out in the bushes. I'd found in a sticker bush, snagged on a thorn, a chunk of Wendell's head. Wendell is the murdered deputy sheriff. A hank of hair attached still to a little pulpy scrap of scalp. Ellis had seen it first, had taken it for some venomous manner of creature. Kill it, he wailed. Kill it, he'd shrieked, and we dodged about there in the undergrowth, trying to keep from getting bit and tainted. Ellis had fairly jigged on out of sight before I'd managed to play the light back into that bush, before I'd come to be sufficiently emboldened to approach again that thorny shrub and squat before it from where I could see well enough that we would not likely suffer a bite, would not probably swell up and die. And I do recall how Ellis, from back in the trees, from down by the creek, from off and away in the darkness, yelled out once more to me, kill it. So now you know Deputy Sheriff Wendell, somebody's murdered him, and Deputy Sheriff Ray Tatum and Ellis, this finding in the bush that leads them to the body of Deputy Sheriff Wendell. So the story goes on. It takes many different paths. Immediately after this introduction, he goes into an extended talk about the character Ellis, how he's the town drunk, and the police seem to favor him. He rides along with the deputies from time to time, and he just happened to be riding along with Ray Tatum on this particular night. So he was involved in the discovery of Deputy Sheriff Wendell's body. But along probably 5 or 6 page discussion about Ellis, his long-suffering sister who puts up with him and he lives with her and so on, and where he works and so on and so forth. But it's all in this very interesting narrative style that T.R. Pearson is known for. So it's a mystery. The town gets up in arms and upset. The sheriff's department, they're trying to figure out what goes on and what happened. So Deputy Ray Tatum is a little bit more thoughtful, and he starts to look around, poke around, and see what's going on. So at one point, he finds Officer Wendell's wallet. I believe the wallet was somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't at his home where he lives with his wife. So this is what he does. He finds Deputy Sheriff Wendell's wallet. I was feeling about to see if that wallet was genuinely empty when I came across some manner of thing off along the back, an item stuck under the sateen flap beyond where the bills go, the spot most fellows would keep a thing they ought not probably to have. It was stiffer than a bill, had made an impression in the sateen, and I couldn't truly much figure what sort of an item it might be as I worked my fingers beyond the flap and plucked out at length what proved a photograph, a portion anyhow of a Polaroid that had been shaped and trimmed and made to fit. It was her. Of course, straight off, I couldn't say who it was exactly, but I could see plain enough it was hardly Dale's sister, his wife. Could see it anyhow presently, and could see it anyhow in time, once I'd recovered a little from the effects of the general vista, once I'd gotten pretty well over the fact that the woman in the picture I'd found in Wendell's wallet, back of Wendell's sateen flap, didn't happen to be wearing so much as the first scrap of clothing. So there's the introduction to the mysterious woman. He knows what she looks like. So that leads him down some other avenues. And one day he's at a local Walmart and he happens to run into this mysterious lady. He recognizes her from the picture and he sees her shopping at Walmart. So he's on to something. But again, the author, Pearson, goes through this long event about him walking through Walmart, his distractions, going through different departments. And he was there to buy some products for his car. So there's a nice sequence here where he's talking about his car, even though he's suddenly found this woman that is the mysterious stranger. I'm a steady and reliable visitor to the Walmart and put upon to stop about every third week on behalf of my Chevette, which has proven an extravagantly seepy sort of vehicle. It tends to lose its fluids out along the roadways and drip and discharge off at the apartment and over at the station house lot. The motor oil pretty much runs straight through it, loiters maybe long enough to lubricate it a little, and at high revolutions, the antifreeze is wont to shoot in a stream from the necks of the hoses. I can't say what becomes of the brake fluid, which gets after its own fashion gone, or figure how the grease in the crankcase manages to evacuate the basin. But I can evermore depend upon that car to get in short order dehydrated once I've taken the trouble to bring all the fluids up to their suitable levels. The idling engine has the look of a fireboat, throws off its liquids in a festive display, and though I've replaced any number of gaskets and clamps and refitted hoses untold, I've never been able to produce myself much effect upon that vehicle. So he has this little scene about just talking about his car and the fact that it has major problems with lubricants. Then he goes back, he's still trailing this woman in Walmart. He trails her out to the parking lot. She gets in her car and he follows her to her house and starts to learn more about her. So through the course of the novel, again, many diverging roads that come back to the central part of the story. He learns more about the woman. He learns that Wendell had been associated with this woman. There were some other folks involved, some other men. That one guy had gotten beaten up by Wendell. They weren't sure why that happened, but it culminates in a tragic ending. And the ending, you think, okay, this is the conclusion. A number of people are murdered. We have a tragic ending, but there's still maybe 30 or 40 pages to go after that happens, because the whole town, the whole thing is regurgitated. It causes a sensation in the in the regional media. They've descended upon by various news outlets, stations from Roanoke, places like that, come to the town to find out what this sensational multiple murder was. So that goes on for a number of pages. And the town is so enthralled with this event that a number of locals even take it upon themselves to try to film a reenactment of the tragedy with their own, with their own people reenacting their roles in it, whatever those were. So it goes on and on for that for a long time. But very entertaining. That's really hard to describe. I hopefully gave you a little taste of his narrative style, his cadence, but the whole book is like that. It's very, I would say it's a good example of a writer's craft, how he crafts the whole book, how he crafts every paragraph and every sentence. But entertaining book. I'd recommend anything by J.R. Pearson. That's all I got.
All right.
Question.
Yes, any questions?
What can you say after that?
Looks like Brother Richard is speechless, so.
Silent, he's muted.
Yes. Okay, so if nobody has questions, just so you know, that book is available in regular print through the library. And as Dave mentioned, it's the first in a trilogy, did you say? I think it's the first in a trilogy. So I'm going to go ahead and mute David, and I am the last speaker today. So let's see. Okay. So okay. So my book today is a nonfiction title. So we've had 3 very different fiction titles today, which is awesome. My book today is a nonfiction title called Highway of Tears, and it's by Jessica McDermott. It was published last year, and the subtitle is The True Story of Racism, Indifference, and the Pursuit of Justice for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. So it's a bit of a somber read. It gives an account of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls of Highway 16 in British Columbia, in Canada. It examines the social implications of why it keeps happening. So just for a little context about Highway 16 and what is called the Highway of Tears, I'm just going to start by reading a little passage. The Highway of Tears is a 725-kilometer stretch of highway in British Columbia. It is a microcosm of national tragedy and travesty. Indigenous people in this country are far more likely to face violence than any other segment of the population. A 2014 Statistics Canada report found Indigenous people face double the rate of violence of non-Indigenous people. Indigenous women and girls in particular are targets. They are 6 times more likely to be killed than non-Indigenous women. They face a rate of serious violence twice as high as that of Indigenous men and nearly triple that of non-Indigenous women. This is partly because they are more likely to confront risk factors such as mental illness, homelessness, and poverty, which afflict Indigenous people at vastly disproportionate rates. The ugly, deadly effects of colonialism, past and present. But even when controlling these factors, Indigenous women and girls face more violence than anyone else. Put simply, they are in greater danger solely because they were born Indigenous and female. As one longtime activist put it, every time we walk out our doors, it's high risk. Across Canada, as across the Highway of Tears, no one has counted the dead. But whatever the number, too often forgotten is that behind every single death or disappearance is a human being and those who love them, a web of family and community and friendship. Those bonds we form that make us strong, those bonds that when broken, tear us apart. So that gives a really nice little summary to kind of the tone of the book, which is very much a plea for justice for these women. who have gone missing or have been found dead along this isolated stretch of highway. And just really quickly, I'm going to share my screen to give kind of an idea of where this location is that I'm talking about. So can you see my screen? Okay. So this is British Columbia. Down here would be Washington State. And so the Highway of Tears essentially runs from on the eastern side of British Columbia to the coast, to Prince Rupert. And just kind of, let me see my photo here. So this is kind of a more close-up view of that. So again, it's 725 kilometers, or about 450 miles. So it is an isolated stretch. There is no public transport. And as mentioned, the cycles of poverty and oppression have often led many women to be put into dangerous situations. Since there's no public transportation, if people want work, they often have to walk from town to town. And that's often when these women have gone missing, is as they're walking or have accepted a ride or things along those lines along this isolated stretch. So the author is Jessica McDermott, who is a journalist. She, throughout the book, meticulously investigates the effect that these tragedies have on the families of the victims and on the communities. And I thought, Mary, your comment about how justice often depends on the location of the investigation. The Indigenous people in this area have historically been oppressed, and there's a lot of historic tension between the white settlers who originally settled the area and Native people. So due to the systemic racism, the disappearance of and murders of these women has often been underreported, poorly investigated, or completely ignored by the authorities. So what she does is she tells the individual stories of several of these women and really gives humanity to them, where, you know, a face on a missing poster is one thing, but she tells their story. She talks to their families. She talks to the investigators who were investigating their disappearance or death. So she really tries to get a full picture of what's going on. So she's a Canadian journalist who spent years reporting on social justice and human rights. And she's very clear that she's writing from a position of privilege as a non-Native woman. She has a connection, being that she was 10 years old when she first heard about the first person that she talks about, which is, her name is Ramona, and she was 16 when she went missing. So as a 10-year-old, Jessica heard about this and was scared and horrified that something like that could happen, that someone could just go missing and never be seen again. So she began her career, and eventually she came back and learned more about the enormity of this problem, the enormity of these crimes that are going on. So wanting to dig deeper, but respecting that she's not part of the Indigenous community, she went to the Highway of Tears initiative, which was formed by family members in the government and service organizations who are following some recommendations to kind of eradicate this problem and the social injustice that accompanies it. So they did give her their support and their endorsement and kind of their blessing to go ahead and research and write this book. So she wanted to do that before she became so deeply involved in this story. So the book is haunting, detailed, and beautifully written. It could be classified as a true crime, so there is talk about you know, murders and the disappearances and things like that. She honors the memories of the victim while ferociously investigating the failings of a society that continually allowed and allows these tragedies to occur. I'd say it's a very important read. It stuck with me for a long time, especially given the social climate and political climate we find ourselves in. These stories take place in Canada, but obviously here in the United States, we have a history of exclusion and oppression towards Native people as well. So I think it's something that we can obviously understand. So let's see. That's pretty much all I had. The book kind of speaks for itself, and I don't want to get into it too much because it's really just a powerful read. She has photos of the victims, photos of their families, photos of people, key players who have been involved over the years. And she gets all the way to the top of the government and for why there's just not funding for these investigations, why a lot of it's been ignored. And it's startling, but it's a very good investigative read. So I would encourage you to read it if you are into true crime, political history, those sorts of things. And it is available at the library in large print and regular print. So that is my book this week, which is Highway of Tears by Jessica McDermott, and I will send I'll send all the titles out again to everybody just for your reference. Did anybody have any questions about that? It was kind of a very condensed telling of a very complex book. So, Lynn, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering, is this, do they think that this is, so it's just women and girls that are being targeted?
Mm-hmm.
Not, do they think this is like the act of one person, or is it over, like what's the magnitude of that?
She presents a lot of different investigative lines that have been taken. There is a theory that at least a few of them were killed by the same person, but it's a very, like I said, a very remote location. And so there's not conclusive witness testimony, there's not evidence, but they have pretty good ties to several of them that might indicate that it was done by the same person. So yeah, but others are just random. She includes, just as a juxtaposition, she includes some stories in response of when like young white women go missing, and how quickly it's resolved. And it's sad. And it's, but again, I think it's important just to kind of realize the position of these women who are 6 times more likely than non-Indigenous women to face violence, which is just, it's heartbreaking. So on that somber note, does anyone else have any questions about that or about anything this week? Again, I'll send out the titles and where they're available to borrow if you're interested in that. Next week, we have 4 more great titles, so we hope to see you back. If you received the email this week, you'll get it next week as well. And feel free to invite your friends. If anybody here is also interested in ever sharing a review, we're always, we're planning to do this more because we just don't know when we can all be in person again. So please do let me know if you're interested. And Sue Chitty, you have a question, comment?
Could you name the titles of the books that may just pique people's interest for next week as well?
Oh yeah, sure. So Sue is actually going to review The Grace Kelly Dress by Brenda Janowitz, which is fiction. Cindy Zarcone is going to review The Mustard Seed, or just Mustard Seed, by Layla Ibrahim, another fiction title. Diana,
it's historical fiction.
Historical fiction. So actually we have 3 historical fictions next week: The Grace Kelly Dress, Mustard Seed, and then My Dear Hamilton by Stephanie Dray, which is a book about Eliza Hamilton, but biographical historical fiction. And Barb Shine is going to be reviewing that. And then Diana Redding, who is the library manager from Corfu, is going to be reviewing a nonfiction title called The Falcon Thief by Joshua Hammer. So we've got 3 fiction and 1 nonfiction next week as well. And yeah, so we're looking forward to that. And again, if anyone's ever interested in sharing a review, we always welcome new reviewers. Mary was one who approached me, and I'm very glad that she did. And I enjoyed everybody's review today. Mostly my own, no. Just teasing. So thank you all very much. And if you have questions about anything, you can always email me as well. You should have all received an email from me already. So have a wonderful day, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.